All right, let's open our Bibles this evening to James chapter 1. James chapter 1. We're going to begin with verse 2 and continue through verse 8. Really, we're going to notice more than that, but that's where we're going to start reading this evening. It says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into divers temptation, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. And that patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, that it may be given to him. But let him ask in faith, nothing wavering, for he that wavereth is like the wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed. And for let not that man think that he shall receive anything of the Lord. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways." Now, when we look at this passage and we go back, I got it all there at one time. Notice that the passage says when. Verse number 2. Count it all joy when, not if. Okay? Y'all going to read all that and you're going to be done before I get done. So that's why I don't like to do it that way. So it's when. Okay, so we're all going to go through those things. Now, when we look at some passages here that we've got listed, I always appreciate when somebody makes a suggestion, and somebody made a suggestion that I do this and write all the passages down. So that's where they are. We'll do that. "These things have I spoken unto you," this is John 16:33, "that ye might have peace. In the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world." Jesus come to give us peace. Okay, now, there's a piece of Philippians chapter 4, the peace of God that passes all understanding. While I'm right here, 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 12, "All that live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution." So that is, it's going to happen then. We look at these other passages in the book of Job, and Job is an interesting study in and of itself. Job 3 and verse 26, "I was not in safety, neither had I rest, neither was I quiet, yet trouble came." And we know trouble came in his life then. Chapter 5, verses 6 and 7, "Although affliction cometh not forth from the dust, neither doth trouble spring out of the ground, yet man is born unto trouble as sparks fly upward." Then also chapter 14 and verse 1. "Man that is born of woman is a few days and full of troubles." Okay. So when we consider that, there's three people in this world, three kinds of people in this world. You might find that odd, but there are. Those who are beginning a trial, those who are in the midst of trial, and those who are coming out of a trial. And guess what? When you get through, it won't be long before you have another trial. You're going to be in the midst of the trial, and it's a rough process. I heard a man he was reading a book at the time, and he says about every 90 days we go through some kind of trial. And I thought, that's interesting. And there's trials at different levels, but there's still trials. All right, when we look at the problems then, and this book is full of problems, people having problems. When we look at that, we see that is so, and we study this, and we get a good overall. Here in chapter 1, verse 9, we find a brother of low degree. He's got his problems. 127, "Pure religion undefiled before the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and the widows." So there are people then that have problems. In chapter 2 and verse 6, "But ye have despised the poor." So here are poor. Now, who's considered poor? And I think that's a good question. I heard my children say that they grew up in a poor household. And I thought, I never considered us poor. We had everything we needed, I thought. But they considered us poor. Maybe we didn't have everything as everybody else had, but we did. We did pretty good. So I think the poor there is relative. That was 2:6. I have the oppressed also. Verse 15, chapter 2, verse 15. If a brother or sister be naked or destitute of daily food, so here again is some distress. People going through problems in their life. Can you imagine being naked and without food? They could. Wasn't like today. Chapter 3, we can just, and I know nobody in here has problems with their tongue except me. Okay. I think of some country songs of times past, and I'm thinking, two things can't happen. It can't, good and bad. When you look at this, a fountain cannot produce sweet water and bad water at the same time. That's what he said. All right, and then we turn to chapter 4. We find that whence cometh wars. That's troublesome times, okay, when we have wars. Chapter 5 and verse 1. Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries. Now, we talked about the poor. What about the rich man? Does he have problems? Yes, he does. Chapter 5, also in verse 4, behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud. So there is fraud. Verse 10, he says, take my brethren the prophets, who have spoken in the name of the Lord for example of suffering, affliction. So we can study the Old Testament. We can find those prophets then and what they went through. Think of Elijah. 450 of Baals. Here was Jezebel, who was always after him, doing something. The prophets. Then in chapter 5 and verse 14. Is any sick among you? We have that. As we get older, I think our days are filled with doctor's appointments. Really, I had one last week. Guess what? I got one this week too. So, and I hope, well, it's not. The one this past week was 8 o'clock in the morning. Okay? That was not good. I hope we won't do that. All right, what do we do when trouble comes? When these things happen to us, what do we do? There could be great blessings when calamities come upon us. We may have to look for that. So how do we respond? And that's what we're going to look at in this book then. We're going to look at how we respond to things that happen to us. All right, so let's notice them. How do we respond? Number 1, positively. Okay? And I mean, count it all joy. Do we count it joy when things happen to us? Not usually, You look at the first century Christians and what happened to them. In Acts chapter 5, we find that they were beginning to be persecuted, okay, and told not to preach this gospel. In 5 and verse 41, and they departed from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for his name. Okay. We understand that. Chapter 16 and verse 25, here's, the Philippian jailer. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, so that the foundation, verse 25. And at midnight, Paul and Silas prayed and sang hymns unto God, and the prisoners heard them. When people usually are singing, what's their condition? We go back to James chapter 5. Is any money, I need to slow down. Is any merry among you? Let him sing psalms. So usually we sing psalms when we are, in a happy disposition. And here was Paul and Silas. I don't know that I could be that way, but here's an example of how we ought to be when things are going bad for us, especially for the cause of Christ. We are told to count it all joy then, and to glorify God as we suffer as a Christian. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 16, if any man suffer as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but glorify God on this behalf. So there is then how we should act. And number one, it should be positively, right? Number two, should be patiently, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. When my first wife was going through chemotherapy, that's when I learned patience. Because when she got that IV bag, and now you don't understand there's how big the IV bag is. It drips, I think it was 72 times a minute. So there was a drip coming. And that bag had to be empty. And one time, the first time I called them and said, well, the bag's empty. And they came in there and looked and says, no, Mr. Dixon, the bag is not empty. When we talk about empty, we're talking about it has to be all the way through the machine and going. And I thought, you're kidding me. Nope, that's what they meant. So 2 days it took, literally 48 hours for those 2 bags to drip through there. You learn to sit there and be patient and wait on those things. So the trying of your faith, and I want to hurry up and get through so I can go home. No, that's not the way. Take your time. Be patient. It will get through those things. So let's look at the book of Hebrews for a minute. Hebrews chapter 10. I think there's other passages that teach us about patience. I think Romans chapter 5 would teach us also about patience. Hebrews chapter 10 verse 36, for we have need of patience. Now that's what he's saying. Here's the writer of Hebrews saying we have need of patience. Now, knowing that the trying of your faith worketh patience. And what he's saying is, then, if we need patience, then we need our faith tried. Peter talked about this, and we talked about this morning in our adult Bible class, how that here is the trying of your faith as though gold tried with fire. And so there is, when we're praying for those things, we are in need of prayer. Then turn over to chapter 12 and verse 2. He's telling us to run the race. Okay, seeing we're compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin that so doth easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. I guess that's verse 1 there. Looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. Run with patience. This race that we're in is not necessarily to the swiftest, but it's to that person who sets that pace and who can run, just continually run. As I grow older, I find that, my pace is not as quick as it once was. Slow down, get through, and get done. And that's the thing. We need to run with patience. One of the fruits of the Spirit, we talk about the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long suffering. There is your patience there in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 22. I think I have, I didn't put Galatians for some reason. I was doing this in a hurry. 2 Peter chapter 1, beginning with verse 5. Besides this, give all diligence. Add to your faith virtue, virtue knowledge, knowledge temperance, temperance patience. So here's something that we need to work on. Sometimes, we need to build on this. 8 Christian graces there. Add to your faith. Here's faith, the right beginning. Faith, virtue, virtue knowledge, knowledge temperance, temperance patience. So there is then that we need to work on. Long suffering, patience. And I think of preachers, how they need patience, all of those. Chapter 5 in James, and I have that there at the end. Chapter 5, really, that's what it's talking about. James chapter 5, verses 10 and 11. He talks about the patience of Job then. And look what Job went through. Take my brethren, the prophets, who have spoken to you in the name of the Lord, for their example of suffering and affliction, and of patience. Okay. Behold, we count them happy which endured. Ye have heard of the patience of Job. Ye have seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy. Okay. So, do we handle it positively? Do we handle it patiently? Next, do we handle it prayerfully? Look at chapter 1 and verse number 5. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask it God, that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. Now, when we talk about prayer, okay, understand something. Look at chapter 4. I don't have this listed. Look at chapter 4 and verse 3. Ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lust. You know, are we asking correctly? When we go to God in prayer, and I think that is a big thing, that we ask God correctly, okay? In 1 Peter chapter 3, and so that's one reason why I don't like to put these on here, because sometimes I ad-lib. 1 Peter chapter 3, in verse 7, likewise ye husband, dwell with them according to knowledge, and giving honor to the wife as the weaker vessel, being heirs together with the grace of the life, that your prayers be not hindered. So how we treat one another also could hinder our prayers if we're not treating them correctly. Look at verse 12. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 12. The eyes of the Lord are over the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers, but the face of the Lord is against them that do evil. So when he says ask correctly, then in James chapter 4, we understand that there is a proper way to ask. And we need to keep that in mind when we go to God in prayer. And that's what, really, when we look at this, let him ask in faith, nothing wavering. When you ask, do you think God's going to answer your prayers? Now, he may not. Well, he's going to answer it. Understand that he's going to answer it. He may not answer it in the way that you want it answered. And I think people mishandle that. They don't understand that. They say, well, God didn't answer my prayer. Yes, he did. He didn't answer it in the way that you wanted it done. Maybe you need to learn, and what he's teaching you is how to pray and what to pray for. Okay? You're asking for the wrong thing. And sometimes we need to learn that lesson too. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 17, we always think about this passage. Pray without ceasing. You know, when you're going, I think about this, when you're traveling, you know, Judy and I usually, if we're going to take a long trip, we usually begin our trip with a prayer. When we're in the vehicle about to take off, we begin it with a prayer. But I think, you know, there's sometimes during that traveling, especially if you go through Atlanta, you're asking for the Lord's help to make it through there. There's some crazy folks out there. And, you know, you need to be ready for that too. So nothing wavering. That's how we ask then. Ask it. Our mind is fixed then on these. Next then, so we're going to handle these things. Now, this is what he's telling them. Here's how you handle these problems in your life. Prospectively. All right? Here are, let's see. Look at verse number 9. A double-minded man is on, that's verse 8. Let the brother of low degree rejoice in that he exalted, but the rich. So here's two brothers mentioned in this passage. Okay. And we've already talked about, here's the brother of low degree, but here's the rich. Now, what is, you know, when you go to third world country and you look at what you've got, when you come home, you say, I'm pretty rich. But then you look around you at people living around you and you say, I'm not as rich as what I thought I was. But it all depends on your perspective. And it reminds me of the time we went to Panama, the country of Panama. And they said, we're going to stay in a five-star motel. And I'm thinking, you got to be joking me, not in Panama. And, you know, I still don't think that it was a five-star hotel. until we had been out, and we stayed at some places, and one place we stayed at didn't have hot water, and the shower then was a hose pipe, the hose, and it was cut off. So, you know, and we scared the geckos away so we could lay down. We also had some beach towels, and we put them down. So when we came back, we stayed at that same hotel, the first hotel that we stayed at that, and I said, this is a 5-star hotel. My perspectives had changed, you know. So it does, it really does. So when we're talking about these two brothers here, verse 9 and verse 10, there are two. One is rich, the other is despised, you know, has a depressed feeling. So how are we handling this? You know, both of these fellows need a proper perspective, because look at verses 10 and 11. We're looking at those. For the sun is no sooner risen with a burning heat, but it withereth the grass, and the flower fadeth away, and the grace of the fashion of it perisheth. So also shall the rich man fade away in his ways. You know, when we come to the grave, both the rich man and the poor man's grave is 6 foot deep. So our perspective on these things makes a big difference of who we are and what we're talking about. The Lord, we find in Job chapter 34 and verse 19, the Lord is the maker of them both. Okay? And then in Proverbs 22 and verse 2, we find that both shall stand before the Lord. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 10, we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ to receive the things done in this body, whether it be good or whether it be evil. So when we stand at the cross, we're all going to stand on equal ground. I don't care if you're tall or short or where you're, you know, we're all going to be on equal ground. Now we're going to be judged then according to the things that are written in this book. What have we done? And that is what we're talking about. How do we handle our problems? Okay? Prospectively, then. You know, I was feeling bad for myself until I met a man with, you know, and he goes through these process, didn't have any feet. Well, here is somebody who didn't have, you know, couldn't walk, couldn't do anything. And if you've never been in that situation, I remember when I was at Alabama Christian, we'd go pick up some lady, and had to be a station wagon. This fellow had a station wagon. We put her in the back of the station wagon, and I can't believe I don't know how he locked her down, but she came on a stretcher. And, you know, I was thankful that I could walk, talk, and she could talk, but, you know, have all the facilities that we have. So prospectively. Then also, perseveringly, you know, we sing a song that says, heaven will surely be worth it all. This is chapter 1 and verse 12. When we look at, blessed is the man that endureth temptation, for when he is tried, he shall receive the crown of life, which the Lord hath promised to them that love him. That crown of life is a very interesting study. It's mentioned a couple of times. Revelation 2:10, be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. We go to Paul, henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness. 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 8, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me in that day, and not to me only, but to all them that love his appearing. Our outlook determines our outcome. What are we looking for? Okay. Set your affections, Colossians chapter 3, set your affections on things above and not on things of this earth. You know, we go back to Hebrews chapter 12, where we're running the race, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. Where are we looking for these things? A joyful attitude, an understanding heart, a mind then of understanding, a surrendering will, and a believing heart are necessary for a proper outlook. A faith that is not tested cannot be trusted. So, how do we respond to these things? And then, nope. All right. So, in conclusion now, we've looked at these. If we go back then and we see these things, here's positively, patiently, prayerfully, prospectively, and then perseveringly. When we look at these things then, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things, then this ought to be how we handle these things. When a person responds to the trials of life in a positive, and we mentioned all of these things that we're going through, then that will surely help him respond in a perseveringly way. Are you a Christian this evening? Being a Christian will help you persevere in the right way. And if you're not, then you can become a Christian this very evening by believing that Jesus is the Christ, by repenting of your sins, by confessing that Jesus is the Christ and being buried with him in the water grave of baptism. If you've not done that, then that's really what we've talked about this evening, how to help a Christian get through these things. But if you're not a Christian, then, I don't know how you handle those problems. But we need to be a Christian. That's what we talked about this morning. Maybe you've done those things and you've gone astray and you need to come back. Now, if you're on Facebook and you need to respond, we can help you. We can get you in touch with somebody in your area to respond to these things. If you're, need to be baptized, then we can do that. If you need prayer, we can help you with that too. If you're in this audience and you need to respond, then you can do that this very evening. Right now, as together we stand and as we sing.